What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another SGN video where it's all Sam all the time. Today we are bringing you the best XP sliders for college football 26. Now, if you happen to see my Dynasty's Broken video where I do break down some of the issues with XP sliders and progression, you might have seen some of the recommended values in that video. But in this video, I'm actually going to go through, break down every single position, the value I recommend, and there's also some positions have a gap where you can go a little bit different than how I have it, and you won't see too much of an impact. So I want to be very thorough for you guys, explain the reasons why, give you the best possible progression experience in college football 26, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
And Bonds hits one high. It's a dig. It is out of here. This is caught. Diggs. Sideline. Touchdown. Unbelievable. Bryant for the win. Bang. Watch out. He's got getting away from the top speed. Michael Short.
Alright, so before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much for checking out this video. I really appreciate that. If you happen to be new, if you could do me a favor, man, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. I have a goal of hitting 25,000 subs by the end of the year, but first is 20,000, and I'm climbing towards that, so every new sub really helps. Also, if you could like the video, it'll help spread this in the YouTube algorithm, which would in turn get me more subs. So thank you for your help and support. I appreciate it so much. Let's dive right into the video. Now, I'm not actually going to show any footage in college football 26. I don't need that because I have a spreadsheet and I'm going to break it all down for you guys, but I do want to admit something a little embarrassing. This is the second time I've recorded this video. I recorded this and was so thorough. When I got done to edit the video, it was 29 minutes long. I was like, ain't no way in hell anyone's watching a 30-minute XP slider video for college football 26. So this is my second attempt, and I'm going to try to be a lot quicker as I go through this, not cover as much, because I did go over a lot of this in my Dynasty's Broken video. So as we pull up the spreadsheet here, I just want to say that this was all done at normal coach XP gains. There was no difference that I could tell in the XP sliders for player growth when you had it at a higher or lower setting. So do what you want with that information. What you're looking at here is my spreadsheet. So the red tab is the amount of players at each position in the base roster, and the yellow is the amount of players rated 90 to the 90 overall rated players and the 80 overall rated players at each position group when sims were done at 100 XP. Now, I do want to go ahead and make note that it wasn't just one simulation done at 100 XP, it was 3 of them. So there were 3 sims done with all positions at 100 XP for 4 years. Every time was 4 years. That's the average length, of a college player's career. So that made the most sense. So sim 4 years, 100 XP, count up the amount of 90 overalls and 80 overalls for every single position group, write it down, rinse and repeat, do that 3 times, take the averages in the spreadsheet, boom, there it is. And then we have, so the yellow column, of course, is the 100 XP numbers. The green is the recommended XP setting. There's a couple positions you have some leeway there, and we're going to go over the recommended XP setting and why. Now, if you pay close attention to this, you are going to notice that there are some positions where the XP is lower than the 100, yet the amount of 90s and 80s is higher than the 100 XP. And I do want to point out that this threw me for a loop too. And I started to realize that positions had an impact on each other. And this really came to light when I was working on the corners and wide receivers. As wide receivers, I have at, spoiler alert, 0 because they progressed so much. Corners needed help, and as I was continuing to raise corners, I saw wide receivers would go up with it, and I could not figure out. I was like, I just need to get a couple more corners rated higher, a couple more corners, and I was getting up to 150, 175 XP, and I was starting to get those corner numbers up, and then I would just cross-check with wide receiver. wide receiver numbers would go up too. As soon as I brought the corner numbers back down, the wide receiver numbers would go down too. So it was really interesting to see that as I increased corner, it was almost like the opportunities for wide receiver had to match it and were naturally increased as well, which led to an increase in XP. I don't know if that's actually how it worked. That's the only conclusion that I can think of, because it makes no sense. And there are several positions like this where the lower XP setting actually gave us a higher amount of 90s and or 80s than the default 100 when it was ran in a simulation with all the other positions adjusted as well. So let's go through and break down everything. And I'm not, again, going to read off all the numbers. I did that my first go around. That's how the video ended up 30 minutes. We're going to try to be a lot shorter than that. So quarterbacks, estimate that the XP that I recommend is 75 XP for quarterbacks. Now, there is a range here, 75 to 100 you can go. On 75 XP, there was 3 sims ran. Each of them were 4 years, and that's for all the positions, by the way. They ended up average of 890 overall and 7980 overall. When you compare that to the base roster of 10 and 74, looks pretty good there, but you do have some leeway. If you want to increase quarterbacks a little bit, you can. Fair warning though, it might increase another position group. Now, I did not go through and cross-check every single position of how it was impacted if I raised another position, because it takes long enough to count all these. All right, this took long enough. I mean, just you guys know, a lot of time put in here. Shout out to Flacco and those guys in Discord. They ran a lot of tests and helped out, so kudos to them, because I'd still be doing this if it weren't for those guys. Running backs, recommended XP is 150 XP. Now, you do have a little bit of wiggle room here. If you want to go a little bit lower down to like 125, you can. I don't recommend going higher. Base roster has 1690 overalls for running backs. I'm very cool with that number. I'm not cool with the fact that there's 288 players rated between 80 and 89 overall. I mean, there's 36 teams in the game. We're looking at a combined 300 running backs rated 80 to 99 overall. That's almost 3 per team. That's absolutely ridiculous. Tone it down, EA. Tone it down. Spread out the ratings. Come on. But the average on 150 XP with this setup is 1490 overalls after 4 years and 180 in the 80 overall range. Much better. Tight ends, this was a weird one, very weird one. Base roster has 10 90s, 90 80 overalls with these settings. So 150 XP, we got an average of 590 overalls and 70 80 overalls. Now you're gonna say, hey, there's room to go up there. There 100% is. You go up to maybe 175, 200. I will tell you, I did go up to 200. I didn't see much of a difference with the tight ends. Where I believe it was impacting was positions that cover tight ends, like outside linebackers and free safeties. And that's why I have it at 150. If you want to jack up tight end to get a little bit more 90s and 80s overalls, you can. Just be warned, you might get a little bit of an increase at those other positions based on what I know about corners and wide receivers. Speaking of wide receivers, I like how they rated the base roster here. We have 1990s and 187 80 overalls in the base. The recommended XP here is 0 because this is a problem position that no matter what the XP is on, it just skyrockets. As you can see, 0 XP after 4 years. The average was 17 players rated in the 90s, which is below base, but then we jump up the 80 overalls to 224 from the 187 base. So again, that's the best we can do. They need to reevaluate and get some balancing correctedness on some of these positions. Fullback, leave it at default. There's fullbacks are hard to use. They don't progress in the game. I tested them at 300. It didn't really matter. Everything was 0 for 90s. You weren't getting 90 overalls, and every now and then you did an 80 overall. Like, otherwise, just leave it. It's worthless. Tackles. Again, this is why I say I need to tune this a little bit. Tackles, we have in the base roster 14 90 overalls and 68 80s. On 65 XP, we have 80 90s and 82 80 overalls. So the reason it's at 65. We're already 14 80 overalls higher on average, but we had a huge drop in 90 overalls. Again, that's where I say EA needs to test this a little bit more and understand that they don't have enough positions jumping up to the 90s without the 80s getting inflated too. Ideally, if we could take 880 overalls from that 82 number and bring them over to the 90 overalls and sit at 14 and 74, that's pretty damn good. I mean, but that's the problem that this XP position or this XP system has, is you end up getting a lot of players that get in the middle ground of 80s, but they don't hit that 90 mark. And so that's why you get this huge cluster in the 80s, and you can't ever get that positional balance or that ratings balance years in, because if you jack up the XP to get more players in the 80s, we're also going to bring up players from the 70s into the 80s, so you get way more 80 overalls just to try to maintain your 90 overalls. And that's not roster balance, and we shouldn't have to do that either. This should be tuned properly for us. Guards. Base roster has 10 players rated in the 90s and 79 in the 80s. Recommended XP setting is 75. We'll end up on average with 9 90 overalls and 73 80 overalls. Very good numbers there. No real reason to deter from the 75 XP recommended setting. Centers, problem position, just like wide receivers, except it's the opposite. Wide receivers, they skyrocket in their overall no matter what you do. Centers stay shitty no matter what you do, man. Base roster has 690 overalls and 5480 overalls. 300 XP on average with centers. We'll get 390s and 3580s. So the max XP boosts, and we're at basically a 50% decrease in talent. That's what happens when you don't test things. Edge, we have a base of 1390 overalls and 129 80 overalls. Recommended setting there is going to be 75 XP. Reason why: we do take a little bit of a hit on the 90s down to 9, but we have an increase in the 80 overalls. We get up to 140, and that's where, again, if you want some more 90 overalls, you could increase that, but you're also going to increase your 80 overalls, and it's probably going to have an impact on your tackle numbers too, because they're the ones that are blocking the edge defenders the majority of the time. Again, I can't say that for sure. I'm just taking what I know from corners and wide receivers and trying to apply it to some other positions that it makes sense. Defensive tackle, another problem position that clearly needs some tuning help. Similar to centers, defensive tackles do not progress at a correct rate, no matter what you set the XP at. And they line up over the center, right? So defensive tackle and center are kind of the same as corners and wide receivers. And I did test this one a little bit and how they impact each other. We'll get to that in a second here. Base roster for defensive tackle is 9 players rated 90 overall and 97 in the 80s. Recommended XP is 175 with 490 overalls on average and 74 80 overalls. And you're going to say, SGN, there's a huge amount of room to jump up on the defensive tackles. You're 100% right. I had been going up to 225, 250, and I was getting better numbers on the defensive tackle that were staying within range of the base, 100%. But like corner and wide receiver, the higher the defensive tackle, it impacted center. It was reducing the center numbers because the defensive tackle number was higher. Don't ask me why, but it was. And because the center numbers were worse than the defensive tackle numbers, I chose to lower defensive tackle and deal with the lower defensive tackle, which still isn't that bad, to have at least 390s and 35 80s versus increasing defensive tackle and having 290s and 30 80 overalls, because that's what it is when you raise defensive tackle. You lower defensive tackle even more, you get a couple more centers, but then the defensive tackle numbers take a pretty sizable hit. This one's a really tough one to navigate, you guys. Center and defensive tackle is a really tough one to navigate, way harder than wide receiver and corner, because corner, at least the numbers are pretty close. These two numbers aren't even, anywhere in the realm of close. I mean, defensive tackle is decent, but center's just on a different planet. Middle linebacker. The one and only position where the 100 XP setting from EA was actually tuned pretty well. Base roster has 6 players in the 90s and 61 in the 80s. 4 years recommended, XP is 100 with 590 overalls and 81 80s. Now we are taking a huge jump of 2080 overalls, but we're maintaining the 90 overalls to an extent. On average, again, when we ran these sims 3 times, that's the numbers we were seeing, and I felt like the 80 overall bump that we take was worth it to maintain the 90s because it wasn't a huge increase. If you wanted to go a little bit lower on a middle linebacker like 75, you could. You will see lower, you'll drop down to around 490 overalls, and your 80 overalls will hit around the 61 mark that you see in the default base roster. So 75 to 100 XP is recommended for middle linebacker. Outside linebacker, like wide receiver, is a position that just explodes, and it's not in the 90s like wide receiver, it's mostly in the 80s. So the base roster for outside linebacker has 9 players rated in the 90s and 68 in the 80s. The recommended XP setting is going to be 0 to 25, with 25 being the one I'm rolling with. Average 90 overalls with the 4-year sim is 4, but we have 103 80 overalls, and that's where I say needs tuning balanced. How are we going to have almost a 40 increase in 80 overalls, but be 50% less in the 90 range? That's where tuning needs to be done. Of course, as you increase the XP, the 90s go up, but we're already at 103, and look at the 4-year sim average on 100 XP. The numbers actually look better on 25. Not much better, but they do. Why the extra 90? I have to assume it's because of the higher tight end, as that's where outside linebackers are making their plays. I have no idea. It doesn't make sense. Corners, we already kind of discussed a little bit what's going on there. Ultimately, I'm pretty content with the numbers. I would have liked to have them higher, but it is what it is. Base roster has 16 corners rated in the 90s, which is lower than the 19 to the wide receiver, and 161 in the 80s, which is, again, lower than the 187 wide receiver. So off rip, corners are rated worse in the game than wide receivers. 125, again, is where I'm going to settle in there. We'll get 1390 overalls and 13180 overalls. Again, both below base roster. Like I explained, as I increased the corners to go up to 150, 175, to raise those numbers up to even meet base expectations, wide receiver numbers would go up with it, even at the 0 XP. They seemed linked. And with the way wide receivers inflated, I felt it was better to take a hit at the corner position than to take even more inflation at the wide receiver position. However, if you don't care and you want to increase corner, you've been warned, increase corner. Free safety, I'm pretty content with how these numbers look. I really wouldn't deviate off of the recommended XP here. Base roster has 1090 overalls and 6280 overalls. 115 XP is the recommended setting, with an average of 9 overalls in the 90s and 9 players in the 90s and 48 in the 80s. So again, a little bit below base. If you wanted to try 125, you could. Think about what free safety normally what their play is. There again, wide receivers, free safeties a little bit. Wide receivers, tight end, and coverage sometimes. So you might see an increase in tight ends. I didn't go far enough down that rabbit hole. I was really only the 2 positions that I went down that rabbit hole on. Strong safeties. This is like center and defensive tackle. This position group does not progress no matter what you do. Base roster has 6 players in the 90s and 63 in the 80s. Recommended XP setting is 225. Average 4-year sim is 290 overalls and 4080 overalls. And I ran this test at 300, you guys. It didn't change much. We were still sitting at 290s. There was one time it had a 3 in there. One time I had 390 overalls. The 80 overalls didn't really go up much. And ultimately, because at this point I had learned about the defensive tackle and center impact on each other and the cornerback and wide receiver impact on each other, I didn't want to go too crazy with strong safety because I was like, I don't know what this is going to impact. You think about strong safety and their impact in the running game and in coverage, and I was worried that this was going to potentially have an impact somewhere else where I was pretty content with the numbers. And again, I didn't want to continue counting all these other positions that were good when I had this number at 225, and then I would just see what this, if raising it from 225 to 300 did anything, and when it didn't, not of anything noteworthy, I chose to stay where I knew what these numbers were with this at 225 versus recount everything all over. Kickers and punters, same as wide receivers and wide receivers and outside linebackers, they skyrocket. Base roster is zeros across the board for 90s for both positions. 21 kickers in the 80s, 19 punters. Recommended setting of 0 for XP and only 0. Do not deviate from this. You will still end up with 60 kickers rated 80 or better and 70 punters rated 80 or better after 4 years. 150% increase in talent at the position. No big deal. This was tested and tuned by EA extensively. Clearly, it's important to them that we have ratings balance in our dynasties as we progress 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years into said dynasties. Shout out for that hard work. Anyway, guys, this is what I'm rocking with for XP sliders. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Otherwise, stay tuned to the next one. Peace.